Hi everyone, thanks for being here. If you ever walked out of a senior leadership meeting and wondering, why didn't that land? Or, I know the work was solid, so why did it fall flat? Then this episode is for you. This isn't about finding your voice, it's about what happens when you're already in the room with senior leaders, and now the question is, can you lead the room forward? Today, I'm breaking down the 6 communication shifts that nobody probably says out loud, but once you learn them, they will change how you lead and communicate. These are the lessons I picked up sitting across from senior leaders, prepping for executive reviews, and yes, learning the hard way when something I said completely missed the mark. So let's start with the most obvious one that somehow nobody gets right the first time: framing. A while ago, I was preparing a senior executive update about data quality. I had all the slides well prepared. When I finished running through the trends, the feedback I got wasn't about the numbers. It was, okay, but what's the business risk if the data quality issues don't get fixed? That was the moment I realized I had just reported the problem. I hadn't framed it in a way that the senior leaders would like to hear. Executives don't necessarily need a status update. They need to understand what it means for their business. Will this delay affect the outcomes? And if so, what are the business outcomes do they impact? Will they undermine the confidence in future business outlook? If your message doesn't land with why it matters, you're going to lose the room before you even get to the part you cared about. Here's how I reframed it later in a separate follow-up meeting. Because of this delay, sales and planning went into the next quarter won't have a solid view of the customer demand affected by the data quality issues. That will also reduce the confidence in our planning accuracy in the future. That version got the reaction I needed: attention, urgency, and leadership support. The lesson? Don't just report the findings. Reframe your message to align with the business outcomes. The second shift is about timing, and this one came from a painful miss. There was a quarter where I noticed we were double counting some of the mature segments, and it was inflating our analysis results. But I held off. I wanted to rerun the whole analysis, cleaned up the logic, and check with other teams, just to be safe. By the time I brought it up, the deck had already been sent out for a QBR. The response I got was, "This was helpful, but it's too late to affect the message now." That stuck with me. Because I wasn't wrong, I was just too late. Now I share things much earlier, even if it's rough, even if it's just directional. Quick flag can be something like, we're seeing erosion that wasn't reflected in the base model. We're still reviewing and can share an update before the reset. That kind of comment, it changes the outcomes. One of the best pieces of advice I got was, your message is only useful if it shows up before the decision is made, not after. Simple, direct, and true. Now let's talk about precision. I once got asked to explain why some market trends won't align with the hypothesis. I went all in, talked about all the possible driving factors that could explain why. After a few minutes, someone cut in and said, "So, what's your actual recommendation?" Ouch. Here's what I learned. Too much information can sometimes make you sound unsure, even when you're not. So now I simplify my communication. For example, we're seeing an X% quarter-over-quarter drop. We believe it comes from Y. We're rebuilding the model and will bring our recommendations and options for consideration in a separate meeting by this date. That story lands much better because it's clear and it sounds like someone who's not just talking with a lot of uncertainty, it's someone who's leading with potential solutions. Precision isn't about saying less, it's about saying what matters first and trusting that the rest can follow if needed. Now let's get into risk, because this is where a lot of people fall apart. I've been in rooms where the instinct is to say, if X happens, it's going to break our ability to do Y. And you're not wrong, but the tone, that gets dismissed. What actually worked better was this. If we lose X, we need to go back to adjust this and this. And that creates $1 million potential revenue misalignment. That communication works better because it was calm, grounded, and tied to the financial outcomes. One lesson I'll never forget is that if it's a real risk, you don't need to create drama. You need timing, structure, and the full grasp of the downstream impact. Say the hard thing, even though it may not sound nice to the executives. More importantly, say it clearly and say it early. Presence is what people notice when you are not speaking. One time, I had a junior analyst walk into a QBR with me to present something. She knew the model, but when asked a follow-up question, she froze. I stepped in to redirect the conversation, but after the meeting, the feedback I got was pointed. You prepared her for what to say, but you didn't prepare her for the room. Since then, I've changed how I coach my team. We don't just rehearse the slides before a critical business review meeting. We simulate the pressure. I ask them the hard questions first, and I always tell them, if you freeze, I'll step in, but if you hold your ground, I'll step back. When I see someone elevate a team member during a meeting or hand credits back to an individual contributor, that's leadership presence. It's not about being loud, it's about knowing when to lift others. Here's the last shift, alignment. I used to bring up concerns from a personal angle, team bandwidth, frustration, lack of visibility, etc. But it often didn't get the traction needed. Then I tried this. We're duplicating analysis across 3 different analytics teams, and we're still not covering the key deliverables. If we align on ownership and responsibility, we can eliminate potential redundancy and support a much streamlined delivery. Same issue, different framing, completely different result. When you make the business hear your key message, not your stress or your workload, you will get heard. Senior leaders don't need to hear how you feel. They need to hear what the business needs and what might happen if it doesn't get it. So here's what I'll leave you with. If you've already earned your seat in executive conversations, these are the shifts that will help you lead from that seat. First, reframe the work in terms of business impact. Second, speak before the decision is made, not after. Third, communicate with what matters most. Then stop, listen, and observe the room. Fourth, raise risks calmly with downstream consequence. Fifth, prepare your team for pressure, not just delivery. Sixth, align your message with the business, not personal story or emotion. If you practice even one of these consistently, your message will land very differently. Thanks for listening. If you found yourself nodding during this episode, share it with someone else who's learning how to lead and communicate in high-stake rooms. These are the ground rules we will all wish we'd learned sooner. But it's never too late to show up differently and change how the senior leaders see you, one conversation at a time. Thank you so much for being here, and see you next time.